Hi, my name is Kelsey Oni, and today I'm going to show you how to make a pillow out of Plarn, which is plastic yarn. So we are going to be using our nice plastic bags, keeping them out of the landfills, and turning them into some yarn so that we can crochet them. So first of all, you do want an extra bag to catch all of your scraps because we're going to be using that later, and just keep it nearby. So the first thing we do, we take our bag and we want to look at it, make sure that there's no visible holes or serious stretch marks or anything like that. This one does have a small hole, but it's really close to the bottom. So we're going to be able to cut that piece off. And so it's not going to matter because of how close it is to the bottom. So we'll just make sure that whenever we cut, that we remove that. Okay, so we want to take our bag, find those tails at the bottom, find the top of the handle, make sure that the seam is on the outside. That way, whenever you pull it tight, it will go smoothly. Okay, you want to make sure that the inside of it is also very smooth and straight. The little fold that folds over in the inside, so that we don't get any extra overlaps that might mess it up. Pull that. Make sure we find that seam. Make sure the seam is on the outside. Pull it nice and tight. Make sure it's straight. Lay it down. And again, just making sure that we're not overlapping excessively, that everything, like our ideal would be to make it as perfect as whenever it was originally made and packaged before we put groceries in it. But we'll likely not be able to get it that perfect because who has time for that? Okay, so then we'll lay it very, very flat on the surface. Make sure we get any of that extra air out. And we're going to take one side and fold it over in half. Make sure it's lined up pretty nicely. So now we have a half. It should look about like that on the table. And then this little extra piece right here, that's going to fold over as well. As close to exact as we reasonably can. And flatten it out. Make sure there's no extra air in there. The scissors that you want to use, you want to make sure you're using some sharp ones, because whenever you use those dull ones, then we get extra pieces and jagged cuts, and your Plarn could very likely tear, and that is incredibly frustrating, and we don't want that. So now that we have it laid out, it's nice and flat, we are going to cut off the extra pieces that we don't need. Okay, so we're going to cut a little bit above this, and now I remember that there was a hole, so we want to make sure that we're cutting above the hole for this one. So I'm going to cut just right along, just about that much. So we have just a little piece of that very end off, and then we're going to cut the handles off, but we're going to cut down a little bit below where that overlap on the handles, that little, whatever that part's called, to make sure that we don't have anything extra, it's not perfectly even where it tears from the others. And so we want to make sure we don't have any jagged edges. So we're going to cut down a little bit lower just to make sure that it's as perfectly square as we can get it. Now that we have our little extra scraps, we'll put it in our scrap bag and set that to the side. Okay, so now we should have a pretty good rectangle here. Those edges are fairly straight, not quite folded exact, but it's a pretty good size. So with a regular Walmart bag, the regular size bags, we're just going to cut it into fourths to get that, what, about 2 inch width. And if you're using a larger bag, you want to make sure that your Plarn width is still about the same. If you're using a smaller bag, like from the gas stations and stuff, then you want to make sure that it's still about the same. But with our typical grocery bags, Walmart bags, then we're going to cut it into fourths. So you can kind of fold it in half and cut through. So now we have two separate ones that are about the same size, and we're going to fold it in half again. And we're going to cut through that. And so now we have 4 little squares that are all about the same size. Okay, so once we get to this point, if we've done it correctly, then each square should open up into a nice circle of plastic bag. So we'll take that, we'll kind of scrunch it down a little bit so that it doesn't get. We have our next one. Hold it, kind of squeeze it, get it into a more rounded, usable shape. And our last one. Okay. So now we're going to string them together and make our actual Plarn. So with the first one that we're going to do, we're going to take one of these and our other one. So we're going to put this one between it so that we can make a T. And it's attached on there, so it will be able to loop together. So with your T, you're going to take your 2 sides, and one's going to be a little bit longer than the other. And the shorter side, you're going to go through that hole and just pull it. You want it snug, but you don't want to pull too tightly. You don't want it to strain the plastic there, but you do want it to be a little knot there. Okay. Then we're going to keep going. Take another one. Make our T. One side's a little bit longer. The other side goes in between the bigger one. And you want to make sure that whenever you're doing this, that this one in between the knots comes out straight. Whenever we do it and it's lopsided, then we'll end up with this, and this is not something that we can work with. So just make sure as you're doing it that you are keeping everything in line so that the bag in between the 2 knots is the same length on both sides. Then I have a few others that I've already cut, so we'll just keep going. We'll make us a nice long strand of Plarn. You can always tighten the knots later on. It's a lot harder to loosen the knots. So really make sure that you're not pulling those knots too tightly. Just a few more, and then we'll get into the actual crocheting portion. You will be using a billion bags and going forever and ever and spending 800 hours on it. Not really, but it'll feel like it. I actually had my kids doing a lot of these first little steps because once you get started on it and like you know what you're doing, it's really not that hard. It just takes a little while to get it sometimes. Okay, so now we have a nice long string of Plarn, lots and lots and lots and lots and lots, and we're going to make our pillow. So we're going to find, here's my two ends. So we're going to find this end, one end of it, and put the rest of the Plarn to the side. Okay, so this is how I started. Okay, from your point of view, this is how we are going to start our pillow. I use my thumb on this. I hold the Plarn. I wrap it. This is the only time you wrap it to this side so that we can make it into a slip knot. Okay, so that's just our anchor. We're not going to count that one with anything that we do. So now we're going to work through the rest of it. I'm going to go behind and pull it through the loop. Again, behind, and we're going to pull this loop over the top. That's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. Okay, so we have 16 stitches, and now we're going to do what we call our turn stitch. So it's going to be exactly like we just did, but this one is not one that we are going to count in our main counting. So that's our turn. Okay. Now, for me, I find it easier to bring my Plarn towards me and my pillow away from me. Okay. And we're just going to go in between these stitches here. We're going to bring it to, so now we have 2 loops on there, and then wrap it around the back. We're going to bring it through 1 loop. We're going to wrap around again, and we're going to bring it through both loops. And that is 1. I'm going to go through the next stitch. We have 2 loops again. Wrap it around behind, bring it through 1 loop. Wrap behind, bring it through 2 loops. That's 2. Go to our next one. 2 loops on there. Wrap it behind, through 1 loop, behind, through 2 loops. 3. Behind 1, round 2. That's 4. I'm going to try to keep it upright. This is the easiest place for it to get tangled up because it's hard to tell the top from the bottom. But it should look like a flat braid. If you see it looking different, just make sure that you bring it back to that flat braid. sometimes those knots get a little stuck in there. Just work it through, and it'll come through. Try not to yank on it because it will tear your Plarn, and that's frustrating in the middle of the project. You want to make sure that it's snug, but you don't want it to be tight as you're stitching. If you make it too loose, then it doesn't have much integrity. But if you make it too tight, then it's really hard to continue working with it. We're going to be working in and through it a lot. It's best to keep track of your stitching as you go, your count. You want to make sure that it's always 16 across, or always consistent, whatever number you end on. That will help it stay more squared. And this is our last one. So we're going to do our last, pull it through both, and then we're going to make our turn stitch. And go around and just pull it through once. Okay, now we're going to count our stitching and see if we have enough, if we have the right amount. Okay, so one side you'll see all the swoops above, and then on the other side you'll see, they call it a heart. It doesn't look like a heart to me. It just looks like loops. But whatever you want to call it, you'll see the two flatten out together. So from this side, we're going to count our swoops. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Okay, so since I did not get the right amount, we're going to start right here. Whenever you have one too few, then you can always just do an extra stitch in the same spot. So we have this one. Wrap around, pull through once, wrap around, and pull it through both. Okay. Now, I prefer to do, if I need to do a correction, I prefer to do it more in the middle. I just think that it looks nicer, and it kind of gets lost in the pattern instead of being real obvious on the side. But honestly, once it's in a pillow form, you're not really going to pay attention. Go through once and go through 2. Go through once and go through 2. So this one right here, that's a particularly loose knot. So we'll go ahead and do our extra stitch in this one. So you can see we already have a stitch on it, but we're just going to go back through it, and that'll give us that extra stitch that we need. And likewise, if you get to the end and you realize that you have, maybe you ended up with 17 stitches instead of 16, all you're going to do with that is skip one of the stitches. And that'll give us the beginning of our pillow. Okay, now I've been working on this for a couple of days. So we have a nice long mat of our stitches. It says to do about 30 rows. I did more than that because mine wasn't quite long enough at 30. But to count your rows, you will look at the way that this is set up. You'll see there's one with a swoop and then a line with knots. So this is one row, this is the second row, and then the third row is the swoops again. So as you count, you can count up that direction. What we're looking for is about 20 to 22 inches. You can just measure it with a ruler, give it a roundabout. This is not one that has to be exact, but you do want to make sure that it's going to be long enough so that whenever you fold it over, you actually have a nice size of a pillow that a head could fit on. Okay, so once we get to the end of our row, once it's long enough, we're going to get to the end, do our last single turn chain. That's that one where we just bring it behind and through. No extra steps to it. And then you want to the end of whatever loop you're on, and then start counting out 15 loops. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I'm recording, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. And then remove whatever else you had, whatever additional Plarn you had attached there. We're going to take this part that we just came through, and we're going to pull that chain, those loops, all the way through, and it's going to create a knot instead of a slip knot. Okay. Make sure that this knot is going to be nice and snug there. Then we are going to start on sewing our pillow together. So with this, I'll put on this side, we are going to start in the corner, and we are going to work our way around the long side and then the short side, and then we'll come back to the short side later, but this will be what we leave open in order to stuff our pillow. So on the corners, we want to put 2 stitches in each to make sure that it's nice and secure. So I'm going to take my hook, I'm going to push it through one side of it. I'm going to find a place over on the other corner, push through. Wrap my hook around, wrap the Plarn around that hook, and it just helps you pull it through. You might find it easier to do it just with your fingertips. You might find it easier to do it with the hook. Whichever way you prefer is fine. But we're going to pull it all the way through. much more of a pain in the beginning. As you get to the end, you don't have nearly as much Plarn to pull through, and it's not nearly as annoying. Okay, and then we want to do a second whip stitch through that exact same hole that we just came through. Round, pull it through, and then we're also going to make sure that that whip stitch is on the side. This is our reinforcement. Now we need to make sure that we get the top also. Pull through, find a hole through the first, pull through the second, wrap around, pull. And back through that same hole we just did. That one in. And whip through and pull, pull, pull. So that's our corner. Now we're just going to work our way along, and you want to try to make sure you get it into each one of the stitches that we already have established. Sometimes they line up perfectly and sometimes they don't. So we're watching to make sure that our corners end up lining up at least the best they can. Okay. Hook, through. Move on to the next stitch. Hook it and pull it through. Just kind of watch it. If it gets snagged, then it could tear your Plarn. So you want to avoid that. You don't want to have torn Plarn, especially because now the light is at the end of the tunnel. You can make it. So then every 4 stitches or so, there is not a set, but you want to put in another reinforcer. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a little knot here. So instead of just pulling it straight through like I had been, we're going to take the loop, bring it between the loop, and turn this one into a knot. And it just helps to hold the stitching a little better with use. Do another 4, 5 or so, and make another knot. About 2, the third. Do one more, and then we'll make this one will be our knot. We'll bring it through, take the loop, bring it over, and bring it through the loop. And make sure that that loop comes in nice and snug, that knot, without tearing your Plarn like I almost did. Be careful. Because I stretched that Plarn a little bit, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 2 whip stitches in the same place. Or actually, I'm going to go ahead and do another knot just to make sure that it is more secure. Just because you've made a mistake does not necessarily mean it is ruined. We just look for ways to correct the mistake if possible, and if not, then we can back up. But with this, it's not torn all the way through, so I'm just going to be a little more careful with making my knot this time, and just make sure that it gets on there, and that'll help keep the reinforcement. All right, and we can continue on to the corner. This tail over here, we are just going to tuck it inside, and that is literally all that we're going to do with that. I'm not going to even worry about the fact that it's sticking out. Come on. So because we did 2 knots in there, that was our first whip stitch. This is number 2. I tend to go back and forth just because it helps me to get into a rhythm. Whatever works for you. There's 2. There's 3. I'll go ahead and do a knot with this one. Through, find your loop, make it a knot. Pull it snug, but not too snug. Okay, and we're almost to another corner. We're going to be double checking it, watching how far over we go, and trying to get it lined up the best we can. So we're going to do, since we're this close, we're going to go ahead and do 2 stitches on the top and 2 stitches on the side. It works out nicely. It's right after a little knot. There's one, and then make sure you go back through the exact same hole and pull it through again. That extra reinforcement. Okay, and now we're going to go to the side of it. So that tail that we started with, just tuck it inside. Find the loops that you want to use on this side. And make sure you go back through that exact same hole. And then we're just going to keep going down this side of it and sealing that off. You can see I have this side of my mat is a little thinner. My Plarn got a little thin up here instead of the thicker ones that I had. So these aren't going to line up exactly right. There won't be exactly the same amount of rows on each side. So I'm really just gauging it by length, making sure that they're approximately right across from each other, make sure that everything seems to line up and is fairly square. And just go ahead and make this one not. Plarn loop didn't come all the way through. There we go. Okay. There's the loop. And pull it through. Keep going with your whip stitch. If you have other crochet hooks, then a smaller size might actually be good for this, just because then you'll be able to fit through some of the smaller stitches. If like a stitch is tighter, then you would be able to fit through it. I do have some smaller ones, but I'm not sure where they are. But even I like some of my stitches, as I'm trying to push the hook through, I can feel they're a lot more snug than other ones. So this one, I can see that this is a pretty big gap. I'm going to go ahead and do another one over here because I just feel like it's too much of a gap. I don't really like that big of a gap in there. And so I'll just give it another reinforcement. But again, because some of my stitches are tighter and some of them are looser, I'm just going to do what I can to make sure it's reinforced, and don't imagine anybody's going to be really criticizing the quality of my stitches. Oh, actually, it's about time for another knot. We're going to turn this one into a knot instead. Okay, now we'll continue. Back to the whip stitch. We're almost to the end of this side, and then I'll show you how we get around to the other end that is currently open and how we block off. Okay, make one more knot in it. Loop up, or Plarn through the loop instead of the stitching. Okay, now we've got our pillow pretty well filled up. We've got the top and the side going along. Now we've got to get over to this side of it. So all we're going to do, we've already pulled it through here. We're just going to wrap it around one more time and go through one of the holes. Just on one side of it though, so that we can bring it through from the center of our bag and run it along this way. I have a nice little purse looking thing. Okay, now we are going to stuff our pillow and finish it off. So off that last open side. So we have our great big bag that we've been keeping all of our scraps in. If you don't have enough to fill up the bag, then just use the ones that are not cut up yet and scrunch them up and shove them in so that they have a nice squishy to them. Get a good bit of the air out and tie a knot in this. Okay. And then you're going to take 4 uncut bags, and these are going to be our corner stops. That'll just help keep the corners nice and rounded instead of collapsing on us. So I keep mine rolled up. So you're going to open them up real big, crunch them up into a ball, and shove it in one of the corners. There's one of them. Let me get that. Another one. Scrunch it up and put it in our other corner at the bottom. Now we're going to shove our great big one inside. And it does have a good bit of stretch to it. If you find that you have more scraps than pillow space, then you can always take some scraps out. But we do want to make sure that we're accounting for the amount of air that is in there. So once that air gets squeezed out, is it still going to be nice and squishy? Okay, so we have this side that's seamed, the long side that's seamed, and we have this long side that is our fold. So, and this is where our Plarn should be coming out. So now we're going to take it and just push it through one of the holes, just like we did at the bottom. Let's get us started. We're going to close it up just a little bit, just enough that we can put another corner bag in here, and then close it up almost all the way so that we can put the last corner bag in. Okay. Just hook and pull it through. Our whip stitch going. And I'm going to push another one through that same hole just because I want to make sure that I'm reinforcing everything enough and it never hurts to put in an extra stitch. the next one, and we'll make this one a knot. Just pull it to the loop, and then pull your Plarn through the loop. Right. It looks like this will be a good place. We have enough of our corner sealed off, but we should be able to fit another bag in there. Push it into that corner, the small cat ears. And we'll keep going. Right now it might be a little lumpy, but as we get it done and start to manipulate it, it will even out, especially once it gets paired with a mat and a strap where they can roll it all up. It will really even it out. Okay, let's make another knot. If you notice that it starts getting lopsided, I think I can feel this stitching over here is scooting. So you can just go through, we'll do like a cross stitch where you're going to go in where you came out and then go over a little bit so that the pillow will shift. All right, so we're in our last bit. There's just a real small hole here, so we'll take our last bag and fill in that hole. And we'll work our stitching around it. Almost done. Make this one another knot because we're getting close to the end. And we have almost exactly one loop left on mine. So I'm going to go ahead and detach it at this side because I know that I'm not going to use the rest of these. Just work it slow and kind of get that knot to come loose a little bit. Or using like pencil or something of that nature can help loosen it. Okay, so now we just have this last loop. So we're going to finish off our corner here, and then we're going to weave it in a little bit more and tie it off.
If you want to come by the business, you're going to be around, come on by.
And I'm just going to follow it along and around that corner. Even though we've already reinforced this is our first corner that we sewed together, but it doesn't hurt to reinforce. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and tie another knot right here with what's left of this little bitty amount. And this excess that we have just goes inside the pillow. Push it through one of the holes, work it down, just get it out of the way. Okay, so now we have this pillow. So we're just going to work it out and kind of shape it a little bit. And that's our beautifully done pillow. Good job.